Welcome back to another episode of Inside Multifamily Access Control, brought to you by Salto. Once again, joined with my friend Colin. Colin, how you doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here. Inside, nice and warm. It's freezing outside here in Minneapolis. So
Yeah, we're coming live from the southeast headquarters of Group 337 in my parents' house. So we're here for a week. Got away from there's 19 degrees in DC, and we don't do that well. So we got out of town, but. All right, so today, two topics we wanted to discuss real quick, and it's, I think, important because it's sort of where the industry, in a lot of cases, is moving. But, two pieces of news that have got me thinking, and that's what a 13-hour drive can do for you, is to sit in, and we did it in one shot too. But if I sat and thought about what are some of the secondary effects, if you would, so these second-order effects, more distinctly, that happen when you see things like recently in the news, Lennar introduced, as Stacy and IoT talked about this, they introduced this new Smart Home 2.0, and in it was a couple of things. Number one, Lennar has an app now that controls all of these things. It's built off of the Ring app, and included into that was a lock by level. So a startup that, if you rewind about a year ago, Lennar was part of their announcement when they raised $73 million along with Walmart and some other people, right? So now Lennar, in essence, is an owner of this company. It has it. Then you see the SPAC happen with Latch and Tishman Spire. And now Tishman, basically utilizing a SPAC, buys Latch. So now at this point, the customer is now the owner of these access control and smart lock systems, right? So you can make arguments that, hey, stuff like this has happened before. You saw like JLL, I believe, made an investment in OpenPath, and Brookfield seemed to always make investments in a lot of people, but it doesn't always trickle down to the actual execution, at least not yet. But to me, this kind of feels different. So let's just, from a thought exercise standpoint, let's just imagine that it is different here, right? And when you start thinking about it and sort of game playing and gamifying the conversation on the strategy side, what are those second order effects that if the customer is now the owner, how does that change some of the norms that have been with, or the power structures that have been within our industry? I can think of a couple. I could also make an argument that it doesn't mean anything because maybe 5 years from now, Tishman's like, you know what, not interested in this anymore. And it all goes back to normal, totally fine too. But I don't know, as you think about it, what do you think some of the secondary sort of second order effects are to this ownership structure?
yeah, good question. We got to start mailing these questions out. If you sending these in email a few days in advance, so I can.
My apologies.
So here's the raw answer, I guess, without too much thought. One is certainly around specification and architecture design and look and feel and things of that nature, right? Because at this point, the hardware is basically defined for new properties and things of that nature. So that's an interesting aspect. What that means and what the actual second order effect is there, I don't know, aside from maybe there's not as much reliance on design firms and some of that sort of piece of it. The other piece, though, I think that the two pieces that jump into my mind right away are impacts on competition, potentially. Is there a competitor of, say, Latch or a competitor of, say, Level that makes a different item, whether it's a thermostat or something else that also needs to be deployed in that application? Do they now want to work with the owner of said company that's potentially taking some business away from them, or now not giving them an opportunity to win that business? So I think that competitive edge piece and potentially jeopardizing other relationships is an interesting thing to look at when that buyer becomes owner. That's a unique aspect that, like you said, it may not be different. You've seen things like that before and investments and stuff like that. So it may be nothing. But then the other piece, though, that I think is the most interesting piece of this is frankly, I'm going to call it a demand on that company that they now own to continue to better themselves. And as we're talking about the fast-paced nature that technology is changing both the physical devices that we're using, the communication that we're using, all of that piece, you eliminate some of your flexibility to take advantage if somebody comes out and innovates beyond, right? And so that next generation of innovation, what does that look like when you've invested in one organization? Can you take, is there a way to still take advantage of innovation that maybe isn't known today by making that move? So those are, I guess, the three things that jump out to me just from you asking that question.
Yeah, totally fair. And I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I do think it changes the specification 100%. Like that power that has always been there for a long time in our industry, where if you own the specification up in the sales process, that you can control it all the way through to distribution and installation and the rest of it, right? Like that was one of them. Then you had, so that I think that does shift, which is okay. The other part of it is that historically, though, that was driven by mainly the mechanical side. So now the electronics is driving that specification. So it makes me wonder, like, is there a devalue of brand that happens in that case? Because maybe you're not as concerned at that point, because now the sort of front door lock is no longer the brand name. It's of forever. Now it's this new start. So it's actually the software matters more than the hardware at this point, which is interesting, right? And I do agree. I like to believe that and take a view that it sort of forces a different sort of partnership opportunity, because I think it's hard for, like you said, they're going to be able to keep up and do everything, because there's corner cases in our industry, no matter what, that they're going to get into a problem around putting resources on them, that they're going to need a partner to do some of those and that. And so I'd be curious to see how that turns it. The other part of it is that it's always weird too. I feel like when an organization goes from someone who serves many to an organization that serves one, that person becomes the customer that dictates specifications of how the product roadmap looks and the rest of it, right? So it makes you wonder. I mean, we all see that for years. Like, your largest customer is typically your best product manager, for good and bad on that end, right?
That's the same. I mean, that's just looking at that same argument of innovation from the other side. Are you going to have the breadth to go and say, hey, what is going on in this area of the world that your owner is maybe not playing in? And now that organization kind of limits their view of innovation.
Yeah, it makes me wonder too, like, like the ADT and Google thing that happened too. That's a good example of this. It's like we're getting to the point of a lot of walled garden type products, and I actually think we're moving to that. But but the other side of me is like having good APIs, and that will allow it to give somewhat of a look like an interoperable sort of system that works on that. And you have the chance of possibly doing best of breed at that point. So yeah, I mean, so the other part of it that to me that's interesting here is to understand sort of the investment theses now that come in from external and internal, right? Because now, I don't know, like in the past week alone, I've gotten more attention from people outside of our industry about, what the marketplace looks like and who the players are and who's doing what, right? So it tells me typically you'll have followers that will come in to inject capital in this area because they want a part of this game now too, right? But it also, I know, keeps away some people that may have put some money in here because they maybe can't put enough money into it to make a difference. So curious on how that's going to go down. But it does lead me to, I guess, the next part of this is sort of, as we think about it, I mean, this is one of those areas that's starting to think about sort of the next generation of access control and smart locks. So, I know we sort of hammer this drum regularly here with what we talk about, but I just feel like 2020 and 2021 are those years where we look at the opportunities to look at the past and the future and say, this is when it shifted and changed. So, give me your thoughts and your definition as you look at, if we could juxtapose the old and the new, what is that next generation of access control? The other part, I'll say, I want to normalize some of the language too, because I think if we use the old language to define the new, shame on us. Mm-hmm. So what, in your mind, what are some of the terms that you would define next generation of access control?
Whew. Terms that define next generation of access control. That's a really hard question. However, I think there's some starting points that I would say can begin the terminology conversation. Okay. I think door needs to go away, right? It's no longer about access at a door and what does that door look like. Access today and access in the future is not just about a door anymore. There's portals, there's different openings, there's access to computers, access to areas. And so I think first and foremost is we have to stop thinking of it as a door. Okay. I think the second piece of it is the term control has to go away. So I guess here's my wow moment. The future of access control does not have the term control in it. There's certainly places where control needs to be a part of your access solution. And there's certainly high security elements that are going to require control. But there's also pieces in access solutions that aren't about control. They're about enablement and streamline and efficiency. And so I think the next generation of access, security is the expectation, not the end result. People aren't going to be happy if you deliver an access solution that purely and only delivers security, And so that secure element, that control element of access, that's just the expectation, and so I think you're going to see this transition to where it's not about getting into a door. It's not about that only. You certainly do need an access solution that enables access and enables you to get through doors and the hardware that's required for that and things of that nature. But it's now about much more than just that.
To be honest with you, that's well said, because that bridges into so many other things, sort of like the value beyond the locking and unlocking, but it also cements the fact that you can't just be all sizzle either. There needs to be steak there, which is the security access control side, and it will differentiate between gadgets and safety products. And there's also, I actually think we, as a next generation of access control, should have a very hard stance. It's like, here's how we define safety too, not just how we define the rest, right? But like do it from a non-apologetic way. That's sort of like, listen, you're not next generation access control if you're not doing these high security safety things either. Like
exactly, that's exactly right. I mean, I think for the people who are in the legacy security industry, and I'll call it legacy because I think that's the security industry as a whole has to start to adapt some of these things, not just on the access side, but as a whole of what are we bringing to the table as an industry. But the people who want to come and get in on the main, the fact that some of this access and video is starting to go mainstream, you're not going to be able to just come in and do only this piece of it, right? Because you're not going to deliver the expected value of it. But for those who are already in it, we can't just deliver the expected without adding on to that as well.
Yeah, it's both sides. It comes both ways. And that's why there's so much opportunity, to the point of me wanting to choke people in our industry to just do stuff moving in that direction, right? Because there's I really don't, I believe the incumbents or even the newer companies that came into the industry through the sort of normal routes, if you would, the opportunities that they have, if positioned properly, to go like, all of those new companies want the problems that a lot of the incumbents have in our industry. They want the channel problems. They want the fact that they have to think in the millions and not the hundreds in production. Like they want all of those problems, but yet we need to start leveraging those point of views. So you're spot on.
So that's my wow. The future of access control. I think we've got to drop the control. That's that.
Couldn't say it better myself. So cool. All right. Well, Colin, thank you. I know I sprung those two questions on you, but you did well there. And I think it's a good conversation, frankly, that many of us I know are having maybe offline, or maybe some companies are having internally. So maybe this can provide some insights on that area, or utilize it to spark a conversation. So thank you very much for taking the time to do it today. And we'll see you back in 2 weeks.
All right. Sounds good. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.